Alright, so I think I'm going to start by talking about the relationship between history, science fiction, and this new wave of what you might describe as Western culture versus postmodern culture that's sort of in current events right now. So, history is usually interpreted as a series of conflicts in history books, but I like to reinterpret it as a series of stages where there's this unbridled diversity that gets reined in so that it's uniform. One example would be like the Wild Wild West, where there's all these clashing values, and then the law slowly moves west and makes everything uniform. So the same laws here apply there. But even before that, you have examples like negotiation gets turned into fixed prices, or before that, um, trade gets turned into uniform increments of value, money, instead of like trading pie and apples and wood. So every time this happens, it's done out of utility. But if you look at the whole course of history, you can see that there's something behind even that. And you can kind of see it starting with the pyramids. It's not simply perceptual uniformity. There's conceptual uniformity, like the alignments of the pyramids of Giza, and also the uniformity over time, like it remains, it doesn't decay. And the increase in schedules, how writing gets turned into typing, or how the wrinkles of the page get turned into the screen. Basically, it's just everything that's rough is nature. And in fact, there's nothing precise in nature. Precision is artificial. So the roughness of nature is always being paved over conceptually or perceptually and spatially and temporal. I can't say that word. Other examples are like how there was a bunch of MySpace profiles, and then it all gets sort of consolidated into one uniform Facebook profile, and then everyone just accepts that. Before that, you have all the artsy coffee shops in the 90s, or any brand that's mom and pops, and then it gets turned into one uniform brand. In the case of those coffee shops, it's like everything had to become Starbucks or Pete's, or become corporate-y looking like them. So how that's related to science fiction is that the bad guy, or the bad entity in all these science fiction movies, is a personification of increasing uniformity. And in fact, all these futuristic science fiction movies, like the aesthetic is everything's super uniform. Even like everyone's mood is super uniform. Everyone's dressed in a uniform. But there's always something like the Borg, or if you've seen, or the Empire, or the machines in the Matrix, or if you've seen that show, The 100, the AI threat, or even Game of Thrones with the White Walkers. The threat is always to try to make everything that's jostling into something uniform. So even like us versus them. So how that's related to... Okay, so the Matrix. So the machines basically represent the bureaucracy. And the Matrix is the screen. And the real world is smoothed over by the machines, and that's accomplished by the nuclear... They nuked the planet and basically made everything the same. Like there's no variation in anything in reality. and they're basically trying to squish out the last remaining part that of difference, and that's Zion. And that's what that represents. And then so the real world is still artificial. It's still the left brain's artificial concepts that are uniform. The left brain's concepts are always like one-to-one recognition. So like this criteria means that general object, or like that's why that goes actually along with the perceptual uniformity, because if things are perceptually uniform, then they're easier to make that one-to-one relationship that the left brain likes. Whereas the right brain, it detects things like faces, and you can see a face from like many different angles, and there's many different criteria you could use to detect a face as familiar, whereas the left brain is built for like one-to-one correspondence. Anyway, I think I got off track here. So how that's related to... Okay, so the left brain simulacrum is the real in the movie The Matrix, and then the phantom simulacrum is the screen, is the Matrix, and then nature is outside the nuclear cloud. And you see like Neo in The Matrix 3, how he peek in Trinity, how they peek out outside the nuclear cloud. That represents what's unaltered by the bureaucracy, or the bureaucratic categories that we place over nature, including theoretical science. Those categories too. So they basically replace nature. What's my point? Okay, so how this relates to current events. So there's this group of quasi-intellectuals like Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan or some other people online, and they are in sort of a tussle with all the social justice transgender group. They want to change laws to make people use their pronouns in like college universities and things like that. And so Peterson, this professor, kind of likens this to Western culture versus postmodern culture. And I started thinking about this, and it seems like they're playing out a simulated version of it, a screen version of it. So how this relates to the Matrix is, in the second Matrix, the architect says they had to redesign the Matrix so that it's not a utopia, so that there's still this kind of us versus them. So, because the human mind was resisting the utopia. So, in reality, basically what the bureaucracy did is it invents the screen, and it calms down civilization. So things like fascism and collectivism and individualism and Western culture versus postmodern culture, all that stuff gets pushed onto the screen narrative. People debating online and stuff like that. That allows them to increase uniformity further, or push the bureaucracy further. We can see this kind of like push of uniformity just by looking at the Wild Wild West and then looking at what we have today. And it's easy to see like how, first of all, the surfaces, and then the schedules and the laws and everything else. And so I'm saying that Peterson and Joe Rogan and these other people, and then the transgender social justice side, that they're not meant to win or lose. It's sort of like what Davos says in Game of Thrones. It's like, it's just a game. But they can't see it as a game. They can't see that it doesn't have any real consequences, because then it would lose its meaning. So it has to be self-deceptive in a sense. Um, but it has to be all pushed onto the screen narrative uh, to placate them, so that their culture can be further paved over and made uniform. And you can see that also with they've taken away all the movie stores and bookstores, and the coffee shops have been made all uniform, and the universities are all slick now. So even protesting, like this group complains about like Occupy Wall Street, where it just seems something just kind of fishy about it. Like if you look at people protesting in the 60s, and then you look at the people protesting at Occupy Wall Street, and you get the impression that they're out there to experience the feeling of righteousness. And but that's good enough. Whereas in 60s it was more about trying to change something. But for them, it was just kind of like getting out there, being seen, kind of like romanticizing the 60s, and then playing that out to give their life meaning. And that's what's happening online with all these social justice people, is they're really just, everyone's trying to make their life more meaningful, because culture has basically disappeared altogether. It's not Western culture or postmodern culture, it's just a bureaucracy. Everything's been paved over. Like even all this motivational stuff that Peterson talks about, it doesn't really matter anymore. It's just jumping through hoops. Nothing's really based on merit. There's still this idea of merit and earn, and it's just not like that anymore. It even Peterson and Joe Rogan, it's like all that stuff, it doesn't really matter, because the only thing that really matters is the bureaucracy in terms of our lives. Like everything else is just kind of like people trying to have something to talk about, because if there was no us versus them, then there'd be nothing to talk about. And the bureaucratic people just made it so society can be smoother, so they put all that stuff on the screen. I think that's all I want to talk about for now. All right. Good night.